Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time on this Thursday morning and afternoon, wherever you're joining us from, to hear from us and our lovely panelists. I will kick us off with some introductions, give you a sense of what to expect for the next hour before we get into the content, and quickly sharing some housekeeping items to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, as you arrive, you'll see a poll pop up in a moment. Please answer this poll that gives us better sense of who's in the room. Second, this webinar is being recorded. We will send it out to you in the next couple of days. Third, Samantha will be leading us through an overview of the California Climate Accountability Package. Then I will be moderating a discussion with our panelists, and then we'll have the last few minutes to be open up for Q&A. So with that, please, as you have questions for us or our panelists, please use the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to go to as many as possible during the dedicated Q&A time at the end of today's webinar. So I'll do a quick introduction of myself before handing it over to Samantha. My name is Natalia Pascual. I am in Agendi's West Coast lead, and I'm based in our San Francisco office. I have a decade of consulting experience with a specialization in climate and sustainability and serve as one of our California climate disclosure leads. I've developed an expertise in everything from complex greenhouse gas inventories to analysis of climate-related financial risks and opportunities across 15 different industries, and I'm happy to be here today moderating the panel. I'll pass it to my colleague Samantha to introduce herself and walk us through the latest with the California legislation.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you all so much for being here today. As mentioned, my name is Samantha Weinberg. I am a senior consultant with Agendi, also based in our San Francisco office. I have over a decade of experience working both as a consultant for Fortune 500 companies as well as in-house championing emissions reductions efforts. I support our clients across all aspects of their sustainability journey, but I have particular expertise in preparing clients for regulatory compliance, as you may have guessed, by me being in this webinar today. And my journey in CSR has really included a variety of roles with different organizations, including the World Economic Forum, DAI, the National Human Rights Council of Morocco, and the African Presidential Center at Boston University. So to really get us into the presentation today, I will start with a very brief overview of the agenda. I know Natalia mentioned this already, but I will very briefly talk about the current state of California's climate legislation. What is it? Where are we today? And then I will pass it back to Natalia for the bulk of today's webinar to have that panel discussion. And as mentioned, we'll have time saved at the end for Q&A, and we encourage folks to ask questions using the Q&A function as they have them. All right, so before I get into the content related to the California Climate Accountability Package, I just want to briefly introduce Agendi for those who are maybe not familiar. If you haven't heard of us before, we are a sustainability and climate strategy consulting firm that serves Fortune 500 organizations. We're very proud to be a certified B Corp company and a CDP accredited solutions provider. You can see there at the bottom of the slide all of our accreditations and commitments that really are in line with our mission. We service over 200 clients and have a global presence with headquarters in North America, the UK, and the EU. And we help our clients with a very wide variety of services, including, of course, preparation for compliance with regulations like those in California through greenhouse gas inventories and climate-related risk assessments and disclosures. But we also work with clients on an array of other offerings, including things like materiality assessments, target setting, transition planning, and carbon offsetting strategies. With that introduction portion out of the way, I will get to what I think everyone is most interested in hearing about, which is on California's climate legislation. I want to start by kind of actually zooming out just a little bit and thinking about where California's climate laws sit within the larger regulatory landscape globally, just to give a little bit more sense of kind of where are they, how do they come about, what do they mean as it relates to businesses that operate globally. So when you think about internationally, there are currently 36 plus jurisdictions that are somewhere on the journey to having climate related disclosure laws in place. There are 20 jurisdictions where they are finalized. Some key ones there being obviously things like CSRD in the EU, ASRS in Australia. And then there are 16 plus jurisdictions where they are at varying stages of in progress with having similar legislation in place. Key ones that might be of interest would be, say, the UK or Canada that you see here. And when you look at the United States, of course, California is the only one to have that finalized, but there are a number of other states that are also on the journey. Three that are currently in progress to highlight would be New York, Illinois, and New Jersey, where they are kind of looking to California's legislation and kind of looking at potentially adopting very similar legislation in their states. So, of course, not every jurisdiction is going to be perfectly aligned, but taking proactive steps to align with the California climate regulations could position your business to be, better able to respond to the regulations that are clearly coming up in other jurisdictions as well. So, what even are the California climate laws? What's being asked of businesses? What's in the California climate accountability package? There are two key pieces of legislation that I want to talk about. The first is SB 253, which is the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. This is one of the key components here. The second is SB 261, or the Climate Related Financial Risk Act. In terms of who's in scope for each of these, the first act there, SB 253, is looking at companies with revenues of $1 billion or more doing business in California. And SB 261 is looking at companies with revenues of $500 million or more doing business in California. So the keynote there being they do not have the same thresholds for applicability. More companies will be in scope for SB 261 than SB 253. In terms of what's actually asked for in each of these laws, SB 253 is focused on the annual disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions, looking across all three scopes. And they're expected to be disclosed on a common digital platform that will be determined by CARB, or the California Air Resources Board. This For SB 261, that's looking at the biennial disclosure of climate-related financial risks in line with TCFD or ISSB frameworks that will be posted on a company website. And there will be the ability to share that link with the California Air Resources Board in a public docket. So when are these actually effective? When are you effective? When are you asked to actually comply? For SB 253, that first deadline is coming up in 2026, where you're going to be asked to disclose scope 1 and 2 emissions for FY25 and have those assured. It's a phased approach. So then in 2027, that adds in your FY26 scope 1, 2, and then additionally scope 3 emissions. And when you get to 2030, that also adds assurance for scope 3 as well. For SB 261, that is the most pressing date that's coming up. That is a January 1, 2026 deadline where you would need to have a compliant report up on your website using either 2023, 2024, or 2024, 2025 fiscal year data, and then you'd have to do that report biennially thereafter. So the core components of the laws are quite clear. There was an amendment passed, SB 219, which you may also see floating around in terms of content that really just provided some additional clarification points on things like the ability to consolidate your reporting at the parent company level and providing a little bit more time for the California Air Resources Board to provide further details on implementation rules. So I know a lot of folks who maybe are familiar with these regulations are wondering, what is the status now, given that SB 219 gave CARB a deadline of July 1 to provide those regulations and details for these two laws. So you may notice that we're on July 17th, and those regulations are not yet shared by CARB. So we are, experiencing a bit of a timeline shift. However, CARB has provided some key updates recently that help provide a little bit more clarification for what businesses can expect in terms of preparing for compliance. The first is that on May 29th, they held a public workshop that was about 4 hours long. It covered a lot of ground. And in that workshop, there were a couple key takeaways to highlight. The first is that timeline shift. As opposed to the July 1st deadline, CARB is actually committing to developing regulations by end of year to provide that additional clarification on how to comply with the laws. However, they did emphasize that reporting deadlines will remain unchanged. They do not see that changing, even though CARB's deadlines have shifted. They also released some initial staff definitions for key elements of the regulations that folks were asking for more clarity on, especially as it relates to applicability. So the first was on doing business in California, the second on revenue, and the third on how to define corporate relationships to understand the parent subsidiary relationship that you can use for consolidation. The third piece is really just that CARB emphasized that they are in a key moment of stakeholder engagement and are looking for feedback. So we do encourage folks to provide that feedback to CARB as requested. You can do so via email, and we'll share all the materials after, so you'll be able to get access to that email if you don't yet have it. The second key update from CARB was that on July 9th, so just very recently, they released an FAQ document. I highly encourage folks to read that document if you have not yet. It is a very helpful tool for understanding where CARB is at in the process and what additional information they have to share. It primarily confirmed a lot of the details from the May 29th workshop, but it's nice to kind of have it consolidated and in writing. But there are two key additions as it relates to SB 261 to flag. The first is that element of a public docket. So that from December 1 of this year to July 1 of next year, there will be a public docket for companies to post the link to their SB 261 compliant report. And then the second being that disclosures under SB 261 can be based on fiscal year data 23-24 or 24-25, as I mentioned. And that's really an acknowledgement that putting together this type of reporting takes time, and having best available information is totally acceptable based on the current state of data collection in your organization. So a kind of closer look then at what the definitions were that were provided by CARB. I know this is a key question as businesses are figuring out whether or not they are in scope. The first, as mentioned, was on doing business in California and what does that mean precisely? So their initial staff definition is largely in line with what was previously expected, leveraging what was available from the state franchise tax board. So what's already on the books with very minor tweaks. You can see here on the screen the definition, right? You have to be engaging in a transaction for the purpose of financial gain within California and meeting any of the criteria that are below that kind of first point. So while this is not written in stone at this stage, we are expecting the final definition to be fairly close to this, given that it's in line with expectations. And we are encouraging businesses to use this to determine applicability at this stage. The second is around revenue and how that's defined to understand if you hit the thresholds in order to be in scope for the regulations. So again, CARB is leveraging the existing laws on the books, and they're looking at the gross receipts that are set forth in California Revenue and Taxation Code that you see here. And again, while not the official or final definition, we are encouraging businesses to consider this as the definition used for determining applicability at this point in time, because we are working under the idea that CARB will very likely be continuing to leverage the existing definitions available to them in other parts of California state law. So given all of that, where are we from where law was signed back in 2023 in terms of actually having enforcement and deadlines? So we're here today, somehow already over halfway through 2025, and we are getting much, much closer to those 2026 deadlines that you see here on this timeline. So ultimately, while we're still waiting for some additional updates to come from CARB by the end of the year, we do have enough information at this stage in terms of the core elements that are written into the law and what CARB has already provided in order for companies to move forward with preparing for compliance. Especially for SB 261 with that deadline looming January 1 of next year. In our experience, it takes typically 4 to 5 months for that process to come up with an SB 261 compliant report. So we are continuing to encourage companies that have not yet taken steps to comply to start doing so soon, so they feel very ready and prepared for when those deadlines come. And with that, I will hand it over to Natalia so that we can actually hear from some of those companies that have already taken steps towards compliance and how that process went for them.
Thank you. Perfect. And as you see, I've been trying to respond to questions as they've come through. Samantha will also be doing that as we go. We'll be taking any of those questions around applicability and the CARB details. But obviously, if you have questions for the panelists, this is also the right place to put them. Please keep sharing your questions. But with that, let's open up the panel. I'd love to take a moment to introduce all three of our panelists today. First, we are joined by Elisa Perano from Heidrick and Struggles. For those who don't know, Heidrick and Struggles is a publicly traded global leader in executive search, corporate culture, and leadership consulting services. They have more than 60 offices worldwide, and the firm is committed to transparency and actively working to reduce its environmental impact. Within Heidrick and Struggles, Elisa manages their sustainability efforts, overseeing everything from regulatory compliance to decarbonization, and she works cross-functionally across the organization to drive progress and advance the company's sustainability strategy. We are also joined by Shannon Hunter and Zulema Ledesma from the from the ODP Corporation. The ODP Corporation, for those who don't know, is a leading provider of products and services through an integrated B2B distribution platform and omni-channel presence. This includes world-class supply chain, distribution operations, dedicated sales professionals, online presence, and a network of Office Depot and Office Max retail stores. Through its operating companies, the Office Depot Corporation, ODP Business Solutions, and Veyer, the ODP Corporation empowers every business, professional, and consumer to achieve more every day. Shannon is the VP of Sustainability with responsibility for sustainability and their small business supplier program. He is accountable for developing and implementing the sustainability strategy across the enterprise using a triple bottom line approach as a framework: planet, people, and prosperity. He works cross-functionally through the enterprise in executing the company's sustainability goals and ensures that customers are supported in meeting their own sustainability goals. And Zulema is the Director of Sustainability for the ODP Corporation, where she is responsible for the strategic roadmap and execution of the company's sustainability programs. She prioritizes both customer-focused initiatives as well as compliance with the company's sustainability disclosures. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us here today. Would love to focus on our faces now as we hop into the panel. Perfect. So you all can see us as we answer questions. So let's kick us off with maybe a more introductory question. So where do you sit within your organization, and how has that impacted the way that you approach or participate in discussions on compliance and the general uncertainty around it at this time?
Lisa, go ahead.
Wonderful. Happy to kick us off. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. So I sit within Heidrick's legal team, though I do want to clarify that I'm by no means a lawyer. This role definitely gives me a unique vantage point to really bridge legal requirements with broader operational and ultimately sustainable goals. It really helps me build trust with internal and external stakeholders and then gain alignment across the business, as I'm often brought in to not only clarify legal mandates, but also try to bring a sustainability lens to decision making. So being part of this function has definitely opened the door for more meaningful conversations with when it comes to compliance, particularly as we navigate this evolving uncertainty and guidance out of different jurisdictions. I'm also just incredibly grateful to have an amazing legal team to lean on. We have lawyers around the world who have helped me make sense of these evolving requirements and assess applicability thresholds.
Yeah, hey, Natalia, thank you so much for the invite. We appreciate it. We're all excited to be here. Great to hear, Elisa. Great stuff there. So we sit within what's called the VARE business unit, and just to focus, that would be our supply chain organization. So sustainability sits there, and I report to our president of VARE, who reports to the CEO. Other functions within our supply chain organization include sourcing, distribution, transportation. So if you think about a sustainability team sitting in that operational organization, we can have a ton of impact on our sustainability practices and our goals. We are responsible for the entire organization, the ODP Corporation Sustainability Program. And with that, we actually focus on also our commercial business, which is ODP Business Solutions, helping them sell our sustainability strategy and sustainability solutions to our enterprise customers. So if you think about compliance, our enterprise customers have really high expectations. And so understanding the landscape from a customer lens is really good. Obviously, sitting in with operations and understanding that lens is really good as well. And, being able to drive sustainability metrics, sitting with the operators is great. The other piece that I think works really well is I actually have an informal dotted line to our general counsel. So while I don't report into legal, we work really closely with them. I have reporting update requirements to our executive team and our board on a periodic basis, and that helps us stay up with the compliance landscape. But I really think the situation we sit in is really great. Every company is a little bit different, but for me, it works because we're looking at our own operational efficiency, which helps sustainability. We're looking at our customer solutions and then obviously monitoring compliance from a legal perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate hearing your perspective on how where you sit shapes the discussions you're having. And it sounds like probably now more than ever, it's helpful to have a close working relationship with someone in legal and counsel. So that's quite important, especially since obviously the topic of today's discussion is around compliance. So appreciate that. All right. Maybe some more specific questions now about how you went through the journey of compliance. So maybe specifically starting with the SB 261 component, because that deadline is looming very quickly here. So starting with maybe how and with whom are you coordinating with across your internal departments to get the support that you need to complete the climate-related risk disclosure exercise? So these can include things like data gathering, insights, approvals. There's a lot of people involved in this process. So how did you go about that, and with whom did you coordinate with?
Yeah, I can take that from the ODP side. Definitely a very cross-functional initiative. We have met and collaborated with our legal teams in terms of interpreting the requirements, our internal audit, and ensuring that we have the correct processes in place for the measuring and identifying of the risks and opportunities. Our enterprise risk management team was crucial in this process as well. We had our external reporting team as well, right? Ensuring that how are we going to report on these findings through our current external reporting mechanisms, transportation, facilities. So really, it took a lot of education, right? Helping them understand what are we doing, why we're doing it, how it benefits us both operationally as well as from a compliance lens. So a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of education, but it's been fun.
I love that. Definitely been fun on our end too. While we're definitely different organization and different industry than ODP, similar stakeholders were involved. Very cross-functional. We work with finance, risk, real estate team. We lease our office spaces, but still a very important team to make sure they are involved in the process. We also work closely with IT, specifically our infrastructure team, making sure our data centers are safe and have the right mitigation measures in place. And then our external teams, our client-facing teams that focus on sustainability, were involved in the process as well to really help us quantify and understand what opportunities lie ahead. So very similar to ODP, very cross-functional. And we were lucky to set up really mature sustainability working groups and steering committees to make sure we had the right people involved in the socialization of the results and aligned on next steps.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like it's a similar approach where a lot of FaceTime with your internal stakeholders, whether it's one-on-one or in coordination within working groups, but definitely hearing a similar theme of lots of discussion and education to make sure that we're all going on the journey together. Okay.
That's
And
right.
Elisa, you mentioned leasing offices, which I'm sure is actually quite common for many of the people on this call and just generally businesses altogether. So, a question that we've heard a lot recently is whether or not to do scenario analysis in the disclosure. And so, maybe a question back to this group is, did you include scenario analysis in your disclosure? And what did you learn from doing that?
Yeah, it's a good question and something we thought about a lot too. I'm happy to share that we just completed our first comprehensive scenario analysis earlier this year, and we will actually be disclosing the results of that assessment as part of our inaugural TCFD report, which we'll be releasing in just a couple weeks. So having conducted our scenario analysis after having done our DMA, I have to say that the scenario analysis was a walk in the park. We were lucky to leverage results from previous assessments that we've done with Agendi, so that we were very mindful about how we engaged our internal teams in the process. So we definitely repurposed a lot of information that had already been collected, which made the process a lot easier. As I mentioned before, we have the right people in the room, our working group, our steering committee, members of our leadership team, and ultimately the results were presented to our board in our last meeting. So I have to say that the assessment was relatively seamless. The real challenge, I think, will lie in really making sure that we have effective mitigation measures, and then also making sure that our suppliers are doing their part in managing those risks as well.
Yeah. And on the ODP side, we also did do scenario analysis. And similar to Elisa, we had a lot of work that had been done from our risk management team as well, which aligned nicely into the results and the work that was done in choosing the various different climate degrees, the locations, the regions, the financial forecasting. So all of that was also something that we found very beneficial. And it was nice to align with what we were currently doing and also just uncover some other areas.
Hey, Natalia, if I could
Yeah,
just
please
add
do.
something, not even necessarily from the ODP corporation perspective to add on to what Zulema said, but just think about what Elisa and Zulema said in the last question and this one. I mean, I think integration and coordination across the organizations is crucial. And I know, Natalia, you and I have talked about this a lot. You actually said it a little bit earlier, but I can't emphasize enough that education from your CEO on down across many different functions. If you don't have that, you will not be successful. I mean, you might be somewhat compliant, but it's going to be really, really difficult to drive um, the impact that you want, and even to drive this compliance. So I just think that's really, really important to note, to emphasize.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for that great summary. And the only other thing I'll emphasize based on what you've just said is leverage what you have. I think both Elisa and Salama, you said this, and that is fully the intention of this legislation, at least in the first year, is leverage what you have. Samantha was talking about being able to use fiscal years 23, 24 or 24, 25 for this process. That's the intention is iterative, right? So building on what you have, making it better, and figuring out, like Elise said, what are the next steps? How do you prioritize for future? So thank you for all of your perspectives. Last question on 261 is also something that has come up a lot in my conversations, which is on what do you align with from a framework and standard perspective, TCFD, IFRS S2. So from your perspective, which framework have you aligned with, TCFD or IFRS S2, and what were some key factors in making that decision?
I can take that one from a ODP perspective. I mean, the key factors for us was just sort of the timing and guidance from California and the work that we were doing. And we selected TCFD and actually did our inaugural TCFD report within our sustainability report this year in May, which we're really excited about. But really aligning our risk management approach with our key stakeholders on how we make those risk management decisions and aligning our leadership team and all the functions that we've talked about across the board was a really key decision for us in that.
And I can add from Heidrick's perspective, we had several conversations with the Agendi team. Should we do TCFD? Should we get ahead of the curve and do IFRS? We decided to stick with TCFD. I alluded to that earlier. We felt that it made sense to just wait, see how the first responders adhere to IFRS, have a good indicator for what that disclosure looks like before embarking on that disclosure. So given that TCFD is definitely acceptable from California's perspective, we'll start there. We'll walk before we run, and then we'll consider IFRS for future disclosure years.
Yeah, and you exactly got the main takeaway there, which is walk before you run. Again, I'll probably say this many other times, but the intention is to be iterative, especially in this first year, to disclose what you have, try to align as best possible with either they're both acceptable under the current SB 261 guidelines. And for those that don't know, IFRS S2 is built on TCFD. It's a little bit more extensive. So that's why we have had these discussions with our clients as well. And maybe you're having that discussion internally. Thank you. Okay, so maybe shifting to talking a little bit about SB 253. Um, we all know this is the emissions focused work that Samantha was just talking about in the introduction. So first and foremost, maybe how long have you been calculating or disclosing your emissions and which scopes? And then I'll have a follow-up of what lessons did you take away from that first year, if you have been doing it for multiple years, to help better prepare you for assurance, which is now going to be a requirement for California's SB 253.
I can start. I think I have a feeling our footprint is a little bit simpler than ODP's. We have been disclosing our emissions for 5 years now. And we've been disclosing all three scopes. We're a professional services firm, so it wouldn't make sense to disclose our emissions without disclosing scope 3. I'll say that our emissions measurement has matured significantly over the past 2 years. We started working with Agendi. We got a lot more granular about our data, about the reports, about our processes that feed into our carbon measurement process. And I'm happy to share that this year we've moved into a tool. It wasn't a painless experience, but we're finalizing that now, and that will help us really create a repeatable process. When it comes to assurance, we are currently undergoing Scope 1 and 2 assurance in preparation for California next year. We will consider getting assurance on Scope 3 as the requirements become clear. I know they said 2030. We will wait to see how that materializes. Eventually, it's of course best practice to get assurance on all 3 scopes. But again, walk before you run. So starting with Scope 1 and 2 assurance, that should be wrapped up within the next week or so. And we'll see how it goes from there.
Awesome. And for us, similarly, we've been reporting Scope 1 and 2 for several years now, probably around 7 or 8. However, in 2022, we made this strategic decision to pursue SBTI and align with their standards and get validated. And so that's when we engaged Agendi to really help us validate the process that we had been undergoing for Scope 1 and 2, and also help us in understanding Scope 3. As you could imagine, our Scope 3 emissions are pretty complex given all of the various different operations that we do. And so really, just getting that external help for all 3 scopes has been an integral part of our success in ensuring that we have the right methodology in place, assisting us in developing the accurate and reliable Scope 3 calculations. We've also engaged internal audit into our process, and they've been really helping us along in ensuring that we have the correct documentation, the correct processes, the correct people. And so over the last several years, we've had internal audit help us with that process as well. And then similar to Elisa, we also implemented a platform this year for all scope 1, 2, and 3. So I feel your pain, Elisa. It wasn't easy, right? There's a lot of methodologies, a lot of assumptions, especially the scope 3 that had to be incorporated. But Agendi has been a phenomenal partner in that and ensuring that we had the accurate information in the tool so that it works accurately and it's repeatable and it's auditable, and so that we are ready for when the assurance timeframe comes along, which is very shortly for us, and which we will start doing that process later this year to get us ready for the January timeframe.
Yeah,
And
just to expand on the assurance piece, we have picked a provider or selected a provider. We did an RFP earlier this year. We've onboarded them, and we're going to start the work very soon so that we're ready, to Elisa's point, for the 2026 reporting requirement. So,
And that's maybe an excellent segue into the next question that I was hoping to ask you all, which it sounds like all of you have selected your assurance providers and are already engaging them, which is great. So maybe a follow-up question is, what did you consider when you were selecting your auditors? How early did you start that process, knowing that the requirement is 2026, but you're both, already in the process?
Yeah, I can start. So we did select a boutique assurance provider. We had to kind of make a decision whether we wanted to engage our financial auditors or pick a different auditor. Had you asked me at this point last year, we would have probably picked our financial auditors with the significant disclosure requirements we were facing. But given that we're only preparing for the California rule at this time, we decided to use a boutique auditor, someone who had experience using our newly implemented tool. Given that we're not experts yet, we wanted to make sure they were comfortable with the tool we had selected and we were using. And a firm that's worked internationally. We have 60 offices around the world, so we wanted to make sure that they had comfort with international emissions factors and so on. I should say the process has been pretty painless so far. I don't want to jinx it. We're almost at the end of it. We didn't undergo anything formal like a complete RFP process or anything like that, but we did conduct references with multiple providers and are happy with the decision we made.
Elisa, I like the word painless, so hopefully ours will go the same. And I don't want to jinx you either, but I think everybody on the call would agree with that. The only thing I would add is I think we did the same thing, right? I guess it's not to add, but just to make sure that everybody hears this. We did the same thing. We did not use our financial auditors either. When we were looking at SEC requirements, we were going to do that. That's exactly why we made the decision. So I think a lot of companies are kind of doing the same thing. So I think it's great for the audience to hear that. And so we were looking for somebody who had that experience as well. Gives us great value. And, we went through the process and felt really good about what we're doing and are excited to get the work started.
I'm so happy to hear that that process was painless, Lisa. Does give me hope for some future audits that we're going through. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure other people are happy to hear that too. Maybe less painless process. Going back into one final question on the details of SB 253, is data collection. So how did you approach scoping and collecting emissions data, particularly across your value chain? It sounds like you both are disclosing across many locations in scope 1 and 2, but also across scope 3. So what challenges did you face during this process and how did you approach that?
A great question, and definitely less painless. So in the past, we just applied a spend-based emission factors to category 1 data. which worked for the time being, but we've ever since working with Agendi, we were trying to get more granular in our category one data and really try to pull supplier specific data where possible, especially for the big firms that I'm sure most of us work with. They disclose their emissions, and it just makes sense to use better quality data when it's available. So last year, with Agendi's help, we pulled data from CDP and incorporated that into our calculations. And this year, with our newly implemented tool, we are pulling data directly from CDP for category one, which makes and category two, which does make our emission calculations that much more accurate. And it definitely takes a lot of work, but we're happy with the progress we're making there.
And similarly with us, I mean, we have a lot of, I mentioned methodologies and average, we do use average spend, but we also report on 13 of the 15 categories. So there is a lot of data that we needed to collect. There is a lot of education with our internal teams, right? We were asking them for data they had never had to collect before, report on, or they would report on it or collect it in a different way. And so really just meeting with these colleagues and leveraging a lot of the tools that Agendi had for us, and specifically webinars and education sessions, and understanding what data do we have now, what are the gaps, how can we make this better, how can we get primary data, how can we involve our suppliers and get them on the journey with us to be able to provide better data as well, right? And we have seen a small shift from a lot of averages to primary data that have made a big difference, right, in terms of being able to track progress. And so I think that's key for us in forward looking, is really focusing on getting that primary data so that we're able to make substantial difference in our reductions. Because as long as you rely on a lot of averages, that's really hard to see any impact that you may have had with operational changes that you make within your supply chain.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off of that we've also set science-based targets, and category one is our biggest category. So it's really, really important that we engage suppliers, and the only way to actually see a reduction is to get real data from them, or spend less, which is definitely more challenging. So
Yeah,
definitely empathize and understand what you work through.
thanks.
Yeah, I think category one is probably one that's relevant for every company that's probably on this call, so can definitely resonate with that. Thank you. Okay, we'll have two more questions to wrap us up in this main guided discussion, and then we'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. It seems like the Q&A box is filling up nicely, so we're excited to get to that. So, second to last question, what are insights, lessons, advice that you would offer companies just beginning on their compliance journey or still unsure whether or how to begin? For context, thank you all for answering the poll at the beginning. That's about a little over half the people on this call who are really just at the beginning and or not sure how to begin. So do you have any lessons learned, advice, or insights to share with them?
The first thing I would do is bring in the right partners. We talked about that, right? Legal, internal audit, external reporting, and do a gap analysis. So understanding where your gaps are at, and then understanding your own capabilities within your sustainability team, or the team that you have within those groups, and then deciding, okay, when you know what expertise you have, what do you need from an Agendi or another partner, right? Because if you're not sure how to go about this, you do need some help from the outside. And it's been very helpful for us for sure. And then once you identify what those gaps are, it's like anything else, right? It's a journey, and you put a roadmap together and you build that roadmap, and obviously you have to move fast. I would say this: if you're thinking about whether or not to actually do this, I would say two things. One, it's a regulation. If what Samantha went over applies to you, you're going to have to do it. And two, there's more benefits than just compliance. Your customers are going to be requiring that you do this. You're going to help identify areas where you can be more efficient and actually save money. So it's just good business practice from my perspective.
I completely agree with everything Shannon shared. The only thing I would add is just make sure that your network is filled with other sustainability leaders. I was looking at LinkedIn the other day and saw and was reading about a new rule in the UAE that I had never heard about. And I was like, could this potentially impact us? We have an office in Dubai. So you never know what's happening around the world. It's really hard to have eyes and ears in different countries. So just make sure that you are well connected with other sustainability leaders at global companies and in countries where you operate. That's my only addition.
It's a great addition. And you've already beat me to this, but I'll ask it again just to bring home the point on how and what broader significance do the initiatives that you've just done, including your emissions disclosures and the climate-related risk and opportunities disclosures, have beyond just compliance, right? You mentioned, yes, compliance is something that everyone needs to be aware of and should do if it is something that you fall under the scope of. And Shannon, building off of what you said on customers will require this, it's good business practice. What specifically do you feel this brought to your organizations beyond compliance?
Yeah, we have a very practical approach to sustainability. You can do a lot of aspirational things, or you can put a lot of aspirational goals out there, but if you're going to be practical about it, which I think is the right way, and I'm gonna, no pun intended, in the climate that we're in this day and age, right? What do your customers want? We all are in the business, of providing our customers with solutions and solving their problems. And so I think for us, it was very practical. We thought about what are our key stakeholders? So, you do a materiality assessment, right? What do our stakeholders need, including our customers? What's important to our company? We were on a journey. We built that journey with a roadmap on what's important. We built goals based off of that. And we decided, and the board was included in this, right, that greenhouse gas reductions and SBTI alignment was important to us because of our customers and because of adding business value. And so because of that, that's why I'm so passionate about what we do and why we educate people within our organization so much, and why I'm excited about what we're doing.
I completely agree with Shannon. Definitely be mindful of your stakeholders. Have a very sound business imperative for the work that you do. Naturally, there's a legal imperative to do this climate risk assessment, and the outcome was very well received by management and our board. When you talk about sustainability within the frame of creating a more durable, a more resilient business, there is a lot of appetite to think about the future in that way. So this risk assessment really helped us prioritize mitigation measures, understand areas of risk, help prioritize our real estate, our IT team's efforts. And that is a really good way of talking about sustainability. And as Shannon said, being practical, being pragmatic in the goals that you set, the things that you do, especially in today's climate, is essential.
Thank you all. So I love ending there for our guided discussion, and I'm already seeing so many great questions come up for the panelists. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to them all, but maybe we can do kind of short, quick responses to get through as many as we can. So Samantha, what
Yes.
questions do you want to highlight for the panelists?
Yeah, let's maybe start with one that came in that noted that because you all, elected to use a boutique firm for verifying emissions, what did you determine to be the advantage of going that route as opposed to the disadvantages of maybe using your current financial auditor for assurance? Just a little more detail, I guess, on the decision making there that went on when you were making that call.
I can take that because we're well underway in the process. I have to say speed. They have been incredible. Their normal turnaround times are between 4 to 8 weeks for limit assurance on scope 1 and 2. It seems like they're going to wrap up within 2 weeks. That's how quick they can be. I know we're off peak times, but really a very quick and speedy process and a very collaborative one as well. I can't speak to what it would be like to work with our financial auditors and how long that would take because we didn't go that route. But I can only speak to the fact that we're having a really good experience with the boutique firm.
The only thing I would add to that, Samantha, would be cost. I mean, we're all cost conscious, and it would cost you more money to go with your financial advisors. And at some point that may make sense, but I think that's another piece. But speed, as she said, is I hope that's the case for us when we start to work as well. So that's awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you. Another question that's come in that I think touches a lot on what you all talked about, but just the importance of engaging stakeholders. So do you have any particular tips for how to educate maybe reluctant stakeholders to engage in the process?
One of the things I think this comes down to a leadership trait. Like you have to build relationships. So you may have to work really, really hard at it. You can't just put together. We use Agendi a lot to set up webinars, but when you have a reluctant stakeholder, you're going to have some one-on-one meetings with them, some in-person meetings if that's possible, to build that relationship. I've been at this company for a really long time, so it's a little easier for me to pull people to the side and really talk to them about why it's important. But I would just say those one-on-one relationships are really important when there's a reluctant business partner.
I couldn't agree more. Definitely helps to have buy-in at the top. So if your management team is supportive, it does help. But to Shannon's point, relationships are incredibly important. I would recommend you stay curious, try to understand the point they're coming from, where they sit in the world, what is their perspective and why is it that way. I would try to stay away from being too much of a ESG disciple is how I've been called in the past, and try to speak in practical terms and in language they understand, and bring them along without overselling the work that you're trying to do, and be and always ground your strategy in business imperative. That's my advice.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just to add a quick bit, some of our most reluctant participants have actually created some of the best processes, right? Once they've understood the benefits of the data and how it helps them or just the organization at all, now it's been great. So just getting them over that hump is the most challenging.
For sure. Thank you all for your response to that one. Another great question that's come in, I think, especially considering that kind of complex regulatory landscape I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, but particularly in the context of having done maybe TCFD reporting after completing, say, a CSRD double materiality assessment, right, or similar scope of work. Did you look to try and reconcile definitions of material risks and opportunities from that double materiality lens and the California lens? How did you really consider the financial lens of climate risks and opportunities that were maybe analyzed in a double materiality assessment?
Lisa, we'll let you take that one.
Having completed a DMA recently, we use the same financial thresholds across all assessments, and we align those with our enterprise risk management process. So it was a pretty easy decision for us. Those are the standard horizons that we use. What else was part of that question, Samantha? Sorry.
No worries. I know it's a long question, but it's really about, how, if at all, did you try to kind of manage, right, the DMA process with the TCFD process, right? Where was there maybe overlap? Where were there things you could leverage between kind of doing those two separate scopes of work?
there's a lot that we could leverage from the DMA to the climate risk assessment. Naturally, the DMA is broader than just climate, but we definitely streamline definitions from one assessment to the other. As I mentioned, financial thresholds remain the same. So the results are really complementary. I don't want to share too much about the outcomes of the results, but what I'll say, well, I will. The climate wasn't deemed material as part of our double materiality process, which isn't overly surprising for a professional services firm like ours. And the outcome of our TCFD report also shows that climate-related events have a negligible impact on our operations. So the two reports, the two processes really show complementary results when it comes to climate.
Thanks for sharing that. And then we probably have time for one longer question or two speed rounds. So,
All right, all
what
right.
do we
Let's
have
see.
left, Samantha?
Let's see what we've got. There are a couple questions that are quite similar, and I know we touched on this a little bit, but just, if you all could speak more maybe to the upside you see from the disclosure requirements, right? Maybe, marketing, business, investor benefits, and have you been able to quantify the benefits you're seeing from taking steps towards meeting those disclosure requirements?
I can start if you'd like me to. Quantifying, that's a really hard one. I don't know if if we're there yet, but I do expect our CDP score to improve because of this work. So that's my very short, quick answer. I'm sure ODP team has more to add.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we have a lot of customers from all industry sizes, shapes, and colors, right? So there's a lot of different requirements that come to us from our customers, including a greenhouse gas emission reporting, which we do CDP, and we actually have seen quite an increase in our score from a CDP perspective last year specifically. I know that it was a very challenging year for all of us who reported, and a lot of companies did see a decrease. We saw an increase in our score, mainly due to the scope 3 calculations, the science-based targets that we set, as well as the TCFD report. So it's had a very significant increase in value for us in that regard. And then we're able to meet the customer requirements as well, because we're just influencing our suppliers through the science-based targets initiative, and value chain has also been super impactful for us.
Measuring is really difficult, but one step you can take that we've taken is we are measuring the requirements from an RFP perspective. And when we win or lose those RFPs, you can't really say that sustainability was the reason why you won. But, again, I think sometimes if you can't check the box on some of those things, then you're not going to be in the running for those RFPs. So I do think that's really important and a place that you can at least start to measure.
It's a great point, Shannon, and a very good way to make sure the business imperative stays as times become choppy, is to make sure that those requests are still coming in despite the changes in climate. So we're also tracking RFP requests.
All right, I think we have time for one last quick question. This is, a question about how for companies that do not have a sustainability team, which departments do you see as being good potential departments to lead the effort? So I guess the question for the panelists on this would be, do you have quick recommendations around departments you worked very closely with when you were working on this effort that you think might be good substitutes in the event that a sustainability team is not in place?
I would say legal. I think in this day and age, sometimes finance could be a good spot because if you want to talk about the business imperative, right? If you're living in finance, and they're looking at like reporting and all of these things all the time, they look at it in a different way, but that might also be a good place to sit. And again, I like operations. I think it's good to sit in operations as well. So those are some options.
Couldn't agree more. I'd say legal or finance. Wouldn't recommend having it be a standalone function reporting into the CEO. I think having an angle for the work helps a lot when it comes to an imperative. And personally, just based on the business we're in, it makes sense for sustainability to fall under legal, especially again as we're in these choppy waters. The compliance standpoint always remains.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I appreciate us being able to squeak out one last question. So I'll close us out with a big thank you for all the attendees' active engagement. A special huge thank you to our panelists for sharing your insights and advice today. For everyone, please be on a lookout for an email with the webinar recording and materials in the next few days. Feel free to reach out directly to myself or Samantha if you have questions following the webinar that you'd like to discuss further. And we appreciate you taking the last hour of your time with us and hope you have a lovely rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.